In this episode, we're going to focus on Isaiah 42. We're going to look at Jews outside of Medina who knew that this chapter is eschatological, that it has to be fulfilled in the future. And then we're going to look at the Jews in Medina itself who knew that the servant of Isaiah 42 was supposed to come in the future. And the Jews that converted to Islam recognized that the Prophet ﷺ is the fulfillment of Isaiah 42. And then we're going to briefly look at Isaiah 42's descriptions and how they match the Prophet ﷺ. So before we get into our first text, I just want to mention that it's pretty obvious that there would have been rabbis and Jews who would have read Isaiah 42 and recognized that it will be fulfilled in a future time because it talks about the servant of God converting the Gentiles to monotheism. So the establishment of monotheism amongst the Gentiles, obviously it did not happen before the coming of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So it's obvious that many of the Jews and rabbis reading the text would have recognized that, okay, this is referring to something that's going to happen in the future. So with that out of the way, let's look at our first text. This is a rabbinic text, the Targum on Isaiah 42. And you can see it says, "Behold, my servant, the Messiah whom I bring." So here, Isaiah 42 is interpreted as referring to the Messiah. Now, you find this often in the Targum when they interpret a certain text to be about the Messiah. As they translate the text in the Targum, of course, the Targum is an Aramaic translation, often filled with interpretation. So when they translate it into these Targums, they add that this person that is foretold here is the Messiah because that is their interpretation. So you have this in Isaiah 42 as well. They interpret it as being about the Messiah. So it's interesting for us because it tells us two things. Number one, it shows you that there were Jews pre-Islam who read Isaiah 42 eschatologically as referring to a future figure that was going to arrive. And number two, it's important because it shows you that there were Jews pre-Islam who read Isaiah 42 as being about a single individual to arrive in the future, which is what we say as well, that it was fulfilled in the single individual, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. The second text is actually 1 Enoch 2. If you go to 1 Enoch 49, the descriptions there of this figure to arrive, they are clearly taken from Isaiah 42. So the figure in 1 Enoch is described as the Son of Man. He's clearly an eschatological figure based on Daniel 7, but also based on Isaiah 42 and even Isaiah 49. So Isaiah 42 is alluded to in 1 Enoch 49. As you can see in this commentary on 1 Enoch 2, on page 117, the author compares the passage to Isaiah 42. "And in him dwell the spirit of wisdom and the spirit of insight, and he will judge the things that are secret, for he is the chosen one in the presence of the Lord of spirits, according to his good pleasure." So you see these four descriptions, they are similar to Isaiah 42, because Isaiah 42 number 1 says that the person is God's chosen one, in whom my soul delight, that God has put a spirit on him, and that the servant will bring forth justice. So 4 points of parallel between Isaiah 42 and the descriptions in 1 Enoch 49. So 1 Enoch, which is foretelling this future eschatological figure, is basing its descriptions partly on Isaiah 42, which shows you that the author behind 1 Enoch has read Isaiah 42 as referring to a future figure, and also, again, just like the Targum, as referring to a future individual figure to arrive. So he doesn't believe Isaiah 42 was fulfilled yet, and he believes it will be fulfilled in the future by an individual. And notice that the person here may be Enoch, because later on, the Son of Man, the person described, is identified as Enoch. So it seems that there's some disagreement amongst the Jews about who the servant will be. You have some rabbis thinking it's going to be the Messiah, and here you have an opinion that it's perhaps going to be Enoch. But there are Jews pre-Islam who know it's going to be fulfilled in the future, even though they may disagree about who it may be. And the reason there's this disagreement is simply because the text doesn't name the person. So we have to go off of the descriptions. Another example of this is actually the Septuagint of Isaiah 42. It says, "Jacob is my servant, I will help him. Israel is my chosen, my soul has accepted him." So here again, we seem to possibly have an interpretive translation. The translators have interpreted the text to be about Jacob and Israel, so they add it into their translation. And remember, the Hebrew text does not actually have the names Jacob or Israel. This is something that they have added into the translation. And we know this because if you go to the Hebrew text, they don't call him Israel or Jacob. They don't name him this way. So if you go to the Masoretic text, which is generally seen to be the best text, it doesn't say Israel or Jacob. Similarly, if you go to the Great Isaiah Scroll, this is from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I believe this is actually the earliest version of Isaiah 42:1 we have. Again, a Hebrew version, it doesn't say Israel, it doesn't say Jacob, it reads similar to the Masoretic text. So this, again, goes back to the theme I was discussing, that there was disagreement pre-Islam among the Jews about who the figure of Isaiah 42 would be, because Isaiah doesn't name the person, yet you have many of these Jews knowing that it's going to be fulfilled in the future, and that's what matters for our purposes. Another opinion in Sirach 48, and this actually relates to Isaiah 49, not 42, is that the person is Elijah, because Sirach 48 talks about the coming of Elijah, and then it says in verse 10 that he's going to restore the tribes of Jacob, and this description seems to be taken from Isaiah 49, which is also a servant song. So although this isn't about Isaiah 42, it is showing you that another servant song was read eschatologically as being about Elijah. By the way, for Enoch, the reason I said that perhaps the figure there is Enoch is because a lot of scholars think the identification of the figure there as Enoch is a later interpolation, but even if it's later, that Jewish scribe obviously thought it was Enoch, so it still proves my point about the disagreement, and it would most likely be a Jewish scribe, because why would a Christian identify the Son of Man there as Enoch instead of Jesus? That wouldn't make any sense. Now, when we come to the Jews in Medina, we know they were expecting the coming of a prophet, and we know there were Jews who converted to Islam and said that Muhammad ﷺ fulfilled their expectations. Now, if you go to Hadith literature, you see that early Muslims are quoting a prophecy of Muhammad ﷺ in the Torah, and you can see that this is clearly based on Isaiah 42. So the Jews who converted to Islam recognized that Muhammad ﷺ was the fulfillment of Isaiah 42, which shows you that number one, they were expecting this prophecy, Isaiah 42, to be fulfilled in the future, and number two, they recognized that Muhammad ﷺ fulfilled this text. So we find evidence for this, for example, in Bukhari 2125. Yes, by Allah, he is described in the Torah with some of the qualities attributed to him in the Quran as follows: O Prophet, we have sent you as a witness and a giver of glad tidings and a warner and a guardian of the illiterates. You are my slave and my messenger. I have named you Al-Mutawakkil, who depends upon Allah. You are neither discourteous, harsh, nor noisemaker in the markets, and you do not do evil to those who do evil to you, but you deal with them with forgiveness and kindness. Allah will not let him die till he makes straight the crooked people by making them say, none has the right to be worshipped except Allah, with which will be opened blind eyes and deaf ears and enveloped hearts. So this is clearly based on Isaiah 42, and I'm going to show you that here is a table showing you the comparison. So the hadith mentions that the prophecy says, you are my servant and my messenger. I have named you the one who depends upon God. Isaiah 42 says, here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. The hadith mentions as part of the prophecy, you are neither discourteous, harsh, nor a noisemaker in the markets. Isaiah 42 says, he will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. The prophecy in the hadith says, you do not do evil to those who do evil to you, but you deal with them with forgiveness and kindness. And Isaiah 42 says, a bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. In faithfulness he will bring forth justice. The hadith's prophecy says God will not let him die till he makes upright the crooked people by making them say none has the right to be worshipped but Allah. And Isaiah 42 says, I am the Lord, that is my name, my glory I give to no other, nor my praise to idols. It similarly says, I will turn the darkness before them into light, the rough places into level ground. So notice the imagery of rough places being made into level ground, matching the hadith which says Allah will not let him die till he makes upright the crooked people. Also Isaiah 42 says, they will be turned back and utterly put to shame those who trust in carved images, who say to cast images, you are our God. So again, the idea that monotheism will be established. Finally, the prophecy in the hadith mentions, with which will be opened blind eyes, deaf ears, and enveloped hearts. And Isaiah 42 says, I have given you as a covenant to the people and a light to the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, and the prison those who sit in darkness. Now, someone may ask at this point, well, if Isaiah 42 is being quoted, why isn't it being quoted word for word exactly? Why is it very, very similar? Yes, but not exactly the same. Well, the answer is that they're quoting an Arabic translation of Isaiah 42. I don't know if he's translating it himself or if they have some sort of oral translation available to them that perhaps they made for their community, because not all of them would have understood Hebrew. But regardless, we have an Arabic version of Isaiah 42 being presented here. So it's a translation. They're not quoting the Hebrew of Isaiah 42. This is important because when you translate a text, you can use two methods. Method number one is that you do a rigid, literal, word for word sort of translation. And method number two is you actually do a free translation. You maybe paraphrase the text. You don't translate it exactly. Rather, you go for the spirit of the text. And often also you'll see people add their own interpretation of the text into the translation. We actually saw that with the Targum and even with the Septuagint, where they added the word Messiah in there, or they added Israel and Jacob. So they added their own interpretations into the translation. So I know that today a lot of people expect that, look, if this is going to be a translation of a biblical passage, it should be word for word literally the same. But actually, even if you look at the Septuagint, there are different people who translated the Septuagint, and different translators had different styles. Some of them were very rigid, literal word for word sort of translations, and other translators used a freer sort of style. And you see this with the Targums as well, which are translations into Aramaic. And sometimes the verses that are translated, you have a very paraphrased and interpretive version of the Hebrew text. So that simply seems to be what's going on in this hadith. By the way, the idea that this hadith is actually quoting Isaiah 42 is mentioned by Ibn al-Qayyim as well. He talks about this narration, and he says that Torah in this narration does not mean Torah proper, but it's talking about the previous books in general. And then he says the descriptions he mentioned in the hadith, Abdullah bin Amr quoted, they are not in the Torah proper, but are in the book of Isaiah, and then he quotes Isaiah 42. Now, with that all out of the way, let's actually look at Isaiah 42 briefly and discuss how it matches the Prophet ﷺ. Here is my slave whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom my soul delights. So this is about the Prophet Muhammad being the chosen prophet of God. I have put my spirit upon him. This is the spirit of prophecy. So he's going to prophesy. He's going to be given revelation. He will bring forth justice to the nations. So he's going to come for the Gentiles and establish justice among them. Of course, Muhammad ﷺ was sent for the Gentiles and established justice among them. He will not cry out or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. If you go to the International Critical Commentary, they interpret this as meaning he will not cry out of pain or grief. So basically, he will rely on God. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he went through a number of tragedies, but he always relied on God. A bruised reed he will not break, and a dimly burning wick he will not quench. So he's going to be kind to the people in weakness, right? The orphans and the needy in society, the poor. He will faithfully bring forth justice. He will not grow faint or be crushed until he has established justice in the earth, and the coastlands will await his teaching. And then from verse 6, I am the Lord, I have called you in righteousness, I have taken you by the hand and kept you, I have given you as a covenant to the people, a light to the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prison those who sit in darkness. So this is about the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ bringing the Gentiles out of paganism into monotheism. And this is clear from the next verse. It establishes the context of this imagery. Quote, I am the Lord, that is my name, my glory I give to no other, nor my praise to idols. And then in verse 10, sing to the Lord a new song, his praise from the ends of the earth, let the sea roar and all that fills it, the coastlands and their inhabitants, let the desert and its towns lift up their voice, the villages that Kedar inhabits. By the way, Kedar is a son of Ishmael, so this prophecy is extending to the Arabs. Let the inhabitants of Salah shout for joy, let them shout from the tops of the mountains, let them give glory to the Lord and declare his praise in the coastlands. So again, this prophet, he is going to bring monotheism to the Gentiles. And then verse 17, they shall be turned back and utterly put to shame those who trust in carved images, who say to cast images, you are our God. So again, the defeat of polytheism, the defeat of idolatry. And actually, even if we look at the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, she describes him in terms similar to Isaiah 42. The Prophet was not indecent nor obscene, nor would he shout in the markets. He would not repay an evil deed with an evil deed. Rather, he would pardon and overlook. So the Prophet ﷺ, he matches the character of the servant described in Isaiah 42. He is this ideal servant, but he also fulfills the mission of the servant in Isaiah 42, right? Bringing teaching to the Gentiles, establishing justice among them, bringing them out from paganism into monotheism. And of course, this was fulfilled when Islam spread to the nations, to the Gentiles. And so justice, teaching, and monotheism was spread among them. So there are Jews today who deny that Muhammad ﷺ is the one in Isaiah 42 simply because he's not the Messiah, right? And they hope that Isaiah 42 is about the Messiah, but I'm sorry, the text doesn't say it's going to be about the Messiah. This is an interpretation that rabbis had, but the text doesn't say it. And the Jews in Medina, they did a similar thing. They were hoping it would be an Israelite. So they denied Muhammad ﷺ because he was an Arab, but God never said it's going to be an Israelite. So you have to go based off of the text.